Welcome, Andy Levy.
Thank you, Molly Jong-Fast. Nice to be back.
We are in a moment where Senate Republicans had this big win all keyed up. A housing bill. They had worked hard into the afternoon. They had sweated through their seersucker. It had been a hot summer day in the District of Columbia. And you know what happened to them?
Let me guess.
I'm going to read you a
Okay.
comment that Trump told Mike Johnson at a private conversation, which was then given to Punchbowl News, as most private conversations are. No one gives a shit about housing, according to 4 sources who heard the speaker recount the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, look, and now, of course, Donald Trump is refusing to sign this bill. And I 100% believe he doesn't give a shit about housing unless his name is on a building where people would pay rent to him. Other than that, what does he care? The fact that there are still people out there who think that he fights for them, despite day after day after day after day of shit like this, of comments like nobody gives a shit about housing. What was it, a month or two ago? He didn't care about the higher prices that people were paying. We know this. We know he doesn't care about anything except enriching himself and his cronies. That's his whole purpose in existing. That's his whole reason for being. And a housing bill doesn't help him there. So of course he doesn't care about it. And then, the interesting thing is he's refusing to sign the housing legislation until Congress passes this so-called SAVE Act, the most unnecessary bill in American history, probably, that does nothing. It criminalizes stuff that's already criminal and stuff like that. But the point is, he wants this SAVE Act because they are convinced that it will help them win elections, because it will suppress turnout among Black people, among brown people, among people who are more than likely not going to vote Republican.
Yeah.
And, you look at what happened last night in New York City and elsewhere, and you know what? They're probably right to be scared.
Well, I also think even if the SAVE Act didn't do a lot of stupid crap and then also completely be pointless and stupid, it also, not to put too fine a point on it here, it's also unpassable, right?
Yeah.
He'd have to kill the filibuster. He cannot kill the filibuster. Ergo, the math is not mathing.
No, but he sees this as, it's a weakness of John Thune and people like that. And he keeps saying things like, well, Thune is, he's a leader. He needs to lead. And he wants, math not mathing and science not sciencing and counting not counting is nothing new for this guy. He doesn't care. He just, it's the 5-year-old mindset. I want this, so it has to happen. So, every once in a while, and I'll give him this, it's rare, but every once in a while, 2 or 3 Republicans actually sit there and say, no, this is too much for me.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I also think, this week, there was this War Powers Act, and, you had the Republicans who voted against it, Collins, Murkowski, Rand Paul, who's always a good, solid no vote. And then, of course, Fetterman, because he sucks, voted for it. But ultimately, Trump got censured on the war in the Senate, where he holds the Senate by, it's 53-47.
Yeah. And again, this is new for him. This is and part of it is probably fueled by a couple of Republicans losing their primaries, or a couple of Republicans not running for re-election. And I don't want to say they've grown a spine, because that's not the definition of spine. The spine would have been to do the right thing when there might have been consequences, personal consequences. But they have realized that, what, they don't need his patronage anymore, because they're getting out of town.
Yeah. I mean, so there are those 3 who have directly lost their seats because of Trump: Cornyn, Cassidy, and Tillis. But then there's also, part of what's happened is the polling, right? He's polling
Yeah.
terribly. Gas
Yeah.
is expensive. People are unhappy. If you look at these state polls, he's underwater in states where he was a kingmaker just a few months ago. So, some of these people are up for reelection.
No, absolutely. And I mean, and in particular, as you said, the Iran war is polling horribly,
Yes.
in addition to that list of things that you named off. So again, that's why I'm saying, I'm not giving any of these Republicans credit for growing a spine.
No.
Some of them are leaving, and others have, I think, rightfully started to take note, even in their tiny little lizard MAGA brains, that, this is not a winning horse anymore to hitch yourself to. And again, this is new for Trump. And I feel for the guy, Molly. His whole life, he's never run up against the slightest bit of opposition. And now he's running up against the slightest bit of opposition.
Well, the good news is that he has a lot of projects, building projects,
Yes.
to take his time up, like the green reflecting pool, which was going to be drained with the uncuttable bottom, which has now been cut by a vandal. But the inconvenient truth is that there is a live stream. So if there had been a vandal, they'd have video of the vandal. That's the reflecting pool, the putting his name on someone else's memorial, that is done. But the tarp remains up, like his fragile ego.
Do we know that the name came down?
Yes, because we have seen pictures taken by an activist group that snuck in under the tarp and took a picture.
Oh, okay. I missed that. I totally missed that.
You got to stay laser focused.
I know. I started thinking, everyone just keeps saying the name is gone and the tarp is up. And I was like, what if the name's not gone? And they're just saying it is.
The name is gone. The East Wing, still rubble.
Yep.
And the Trump triumphal arch.
The arch, yeah.
Not yet built.
No, and I heard now he wants to put a fist on top of it. Did you hear this?
No way.
Yes, the fist that he raised after the assassination attempt, or as some people call it, the assassination attempt.
There is no way that he can put a giant fist.
He wanted a giant fist on top of it, and I could suggest where that fist would be better put, but
there's no world in which that is real.
It's real.
It cannot be real.
Maybe it's not.
I think the point here is that Donald Trump is, he's 80 and he's starting to get wackier and wackier. He has entered his sort of rosebud phase.
Yeah, we still have over 2 years of this, and it's just amazing because he just, I mean, every day is worse and worse. He's been to the doctor, was it 762 times, I think? Or did I just make that up? I don't know.
I think 3. He's been to Walter Reed 3 times, but that's
I thought it was more than that. Or he's seen 20 doctors. Is that what it was?
Well, the doctors can come anytime they want, but he goes to Walter Reed, right? 3 times.
Right. Look, anyone who deals with dementia knows that the best you hope for is for the decline to slow.
Right.
Like that's literally the best case scenario. There's nothing that will reverse it. And there's really nothing that will even keep it where it is. It's just the best case scenario is you try some of these drugs or whatever that maybe slow the rate of decline. But my point is, this is him. This is, America is dealing with an elderly parent right now. In addition to those of us who are dealing with it in our personal lives, the entire country is now dealing with an elderly parent as president. And so we have to pay attention to him every day and see what he says every day. And, people have to make sure he eats every day and that he takes his medications and, that he doesn't walk into a wall. That's the entire country right now. That's where we are.
So one of the things that happened last night was that there was a big upset for some incumbents in New York. Politico does really good reporting on New York State, which is a stark contrast to some of their larger national political reporting, though some of it's good, though some of it is not. They said it was insurgents over incumbents. Discuss.
Well, I think that's right. And I think, it's interesting. Most of these insurgents are coming from the left. And so this is being painted as a big win for the left, in New York, for the DSA, the Democratic Socialists. And I think all of that is true. And I'm happy about it. So I don't want to minimize that at all. I do think it's not quite all about positions. I think a lot of it is about being tired of people who are perceived to not fight.
Right.
And I think
that's right.
I think it's more about that. And I think it's people that the general population looks at and says, this guy's been in office for a decade, or this guy's been in office for 6 years, or whatever it is. And look at the world around me. And what have they done to combat that? And
Right.
and I think for a lot of people, the answer is not much. And if I'm Chuck Schumer, if I'm Hakeem Jeffries, I am sweating right now. Because if you want to talk about two leading Democratic figures who are not perceived as fighters, I mean, that's the big two right there. And it's easy to say, oh, New York is not the rest of New York City is not the rest of the country. And that's true. New York City is not even New York State. You can say, someone like Chuck Schumer can console themselves and say, well, New York City, there's Long Island, there's upstate. But because I think this is more than a left-right split, and I think we're seeing this in Maine and places like that, where candidates who maybe, have issues and aren't the best are winning handily over establishment figures, Plattner.
But mostly not. I mean, I just went through the whole thing with Jacob Rabashkin from Inside Elections. And actually, I mean, Maine is its own thing. But mostly in the swing districts, they're elevating mini Mikey Sherrills. And in the very blue districts, they're elevating people who look more like what the base looks like. No, I think the thing that's important that we look at this moment is Jeffries is from New York. Schumer is from New York. And they're actually both from New York City.
Right.
They both endorsed candidates that were the incumbents. Chuck Schumer, I don't know how active he got in this race, but he certainly he never endorsed Zoran. He's been pretty hands-off with the mayor. The mayor went in and got involved in these House races, which there's not a ton of precedent for. There was some hurt feelings. The thing when I read all the reporting that I get so struck by is that people are mad at him for things like, well, I scratched your back, you were supposed to scratch mine. I endorsed you, it was my turn. It was his turn. A lot of the kind of stuff that we in the pundit, or at least I really don't like.
Yeah, sure.
They're mad at him for not being a company man, which I think in my mind is not a virtue.
No, especially when the company is failing.
Yeah.
But again, I agree with you, by the way. You talked about Mikey Sherrill and in swing districts, 100% agree with you. And that's why my initial point was not to take anything away from the left in New York City and the DSA in New York City, because clearly a huge win last night. But also, yes, okay, fine. You don't run the same candidates in New York City as you run in other places. The interesting thing to me, two things. One is the people who always are quick to point that out never point it out in reverse. They never point out after a further left candidate wins in New York City. They never say, that's great. That's who we should be running in New York City. They're still pissed.
Right.
So it never flips the other way. And they think the people you run in Kansas are the same people you should run in New York City. So there's that. But again, this goes back to what you said about the more moderate, the Mikey Sherrills and the people like that. I think that's where it goes back to the fighters versus the Schumers, for lack of a better word. Yeah. And it's people that, again, they're Mikey Sherrill not to keep bringing her name up, people like that are not DSA members. They are not radical lefties. They're not even going around saying free Palestine. Like, they are centrist, maybe a tiny bit left of center in some cases, but they are centrist Democrats for the most part. But they have correctly gauged the mood of the country and the mood of the Democrats in the country anyway. And the mood of the Democrats, I think, in the country, regardless of where you live, is not, we need someone who's going to reach across the aisle.
No.
I think that fiction has been, long dispelled at this point.
Yes. And I also think at this moment, we're seeing, like, if you look at the base is really mad. And they're mad at leadership, and they feel that the kind of tacking to the center did not work. Now, this is more complicated, right? Like, this is more than just one primary. It's about, what do voters in the Democratic base want? And they clearly want pushback, right? They want fight against Trump, but they also want things that, they want single payer. I mean, that seems really clear. I think also they want people who believe what they say. Like, when you watch Zoran, one of the things, I mean, Zoran is like a once in a generation politician. He's very good at talking to people. He's very good at staying focused. He's just very focused on these very core tenets, right? Like, he's not out there saying, like, we're going to do culture war stuff. He's like, I am here on affordability.
Yes, 100%. He's authentic.
Yeah.
Even if you don't like his positions, that's what he believes. And that goes, I think, hand in hand with the fighters. And as opposed to the ones who are, checking the polls every day to see where their positions should be calibrated and saying maybe one thing about, trans rights one day and then a week later backpedaling because someone got mad at them. And you're not getting that from a Mamdani. And I think elevating any politician to the level of, a god or a cult leader is bad. And I'm not going to do that with him. I'm sure he has
good at what he does.
Flaws,
I mean,
but he's,
You may not love his ideology, but, like, the man went in there, met with Trump, and Trump was like, this guy's great.
Yeah.
Let's throw Elise Stefanik under the bus. Like,
right.
A lot of people meet with Trump and end up hiding behind a manila folder.
Right, exactly. And Brad Lander, same thing. I mean, Brad Lander, who defeated Dan Goldman, I could not really think of two more opposite avatars for the Democratic Party.
Right. Both Jews.
Yeah. And, the fact that Brad Lander, puts his body on the line, actually got arrested in a nice protest.
That's right.
And also is very clearly a man of his convictions. And again, even if you disagree with them, you have to realize that. And whereas Dan Goldman just, and look, I don't want to, completely badmouth him. He did decent work with the impeachment stuff, but he very much seems like a corporate Democrat. And that's certainly not the mood of New York right now.
Yeah.
And that race wasn't particularly close, as it turned out.
No, it was not. And it's funny because it's like, if you looked at the district above it, Dan Goldman maybe could have, Micah is not so different than Dan. I think he's more of a Menchie guy, but ultimately Micah did not run in a completely different way. He ran in a somewhat similar way, but it was, you have to be where you're from, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, we keep hearing about, all this anti-Semitism on the left is what made these candidates win. It's like, first of all, as you said, both Lander and Goldman, Jewish. That is, if not the biggest Jewish district in the country, then it's the second biggest. I can't remember. So you're talking about a lot of Jewish voters who voted for the Jewish Brad Lander. And somehow this is anti-Semitic or bad for the Jews. Yeah. And I think the actual truth is that blindly supporting Israel is finally not the way to win every Jewish vote. And
or any.
And in some cases, any. And I think obviously that's a good thing. And I think that a lot of politicians who have been used to blindly supporting Israel, whether they actually support Israel or not, but just to get the Jewish vote, are going to have to realize that that doesn't really play in the era of Netanyahu and Gaza and everything else disgusting going on over there.
Andy Levy,
Molly Jong-Fast.
will you come back?
Sure, I'll stay now. We can talk for like another 3-4 hours. Jesse is no, I'm being
not
told
Joe
Jesse
Rogan,
doesn't want to do
baby.
that.
It's not Joe Rogan. I'll bring back the dog.